Hello again, and welcome to the last podcast of 2024. And what I thought I'd do, last year I did a bit more of a serious review, I suppose. And this year I thought I would do something a little different that I haven't really done before. I've kind of touched on it a few times, but I thought I'd do kind of blooper reel. So really just share some stories, behind the scenes stories, mostly from this year, but I'll also share one from a couple of years ago because it's very much etched in my mind. And these things are all relevant as well to the realities of certainly photographing wildlife, but I think also apply to travel photography, any adventure travel, any adventure activities. You're going to have these moments, and they're all happening in the background. And what you get as a final result, often there's a story behind, in my case, photographs that I don't share with the people who buy them. So hopefully that's a good introduction. So I wanted to start with, I guess, a bit of background. So if you don't know me, or if you haven't been listening to the podcast for a while, so I live in southwest France. I'm about an hour, just over an hour east of Bordeaux. And basically, I grew up in the UK. I've lived in Australia. I'm a dual Australian British citizen. And naturally, I now live in France, just to be different. And I live in quite a small place. I'm on the edge of a small town or a large village, depending on how you cut your cloth on that one. And that means that I have all the usual things that everybody else has to deal with. So I've got my house to sort out. I've got a 3,000 square meter plot here, which is lovely, but needs looking after. And the reason I'm sharing this is that when I speak to people about what I do, often they conjure up an image of a wildlife photographer, which I'm sure has me out photographing animals lots and lots of the time, and not doing very much else. In fact, in my case, at least, the opposite is very much true, because I have my business to run, which takes up most of the time. And also alongside the photography, I have another project that I'm working on. So basically, I don't get to photograph wildlife that often. I have other projects. There are some photography projects that I have kind of in the background that I want to do more with, but haven't. And then the major project, the other project I'm working on, is actually completely separate to photography. So I'm sort of bouncing between the two. And the reason for sharing that is, I suppose, to emphasize that when I get the chance, and I do grab the chances when I can, but when I get the chance to photograph wildlife, I'm probably not that different to a lot of other people, in as much as I have to think about what I'm doing, do my prep, get myself checked out medically, make sure that I have all the necessary inoculations. If I'm running off old inoculations, so in the case of rabies, when I was going to Uganda, it's quite easy to find out information about what rabies shots you need when you take the first shot. It's a little bit harder to find out what booster shots you need and when. And then after that, I found it was pretty much impossible to work out what I needed. So that involved a blood test before I went to Uganda, just to see how much rabies vaccine was still knocking around in my blood. So there's just things like that I have to think about. And this is why when I talk about preparation for going on one of these trips, in podcasts or in webinars, whatever it might be, I'm very much speaking from experience, because I have to do it the same as everybody else. So I guess the big thing for me this year, excuse me, was the opportunity to go back to Namibia. And I really love Namibia. I've only been there a couple of times, but it's one of those places I've wanted to go to for a very long time. And it certainly didn't disappoint the times that I've been. And in many ways, it's a bit like Victoria Falls, which is another place I wanted to go to for a long time. Was lucky enough to spend a month there in 2020, just before COVID. And that's kind of in my plans for 2025 to return to Zimbabwe. and not be very far from Vic Falls, but that's something I'll come to later. But looking at the kind of blooper reel, I thought it would be perhaps useful just to talk a little bit about what went on when I went to Namibia. So just to sort of cherry pick that particular trip. So that came about because if you don't know anything about me, my photography, one of the big things for me about photographing wildlife is that I'm very passionate about wildlife. I think these animals are amazing. Ever since I was a child, I've loved reading about them, learning about them, loved people like David Attenborough, going back in years, because obviously David Attenborough has been around quite a long time now. And it just lapped up those stories. I also wanted to be an explorer when I was very young. To some extent, I think I've kind of ticked that box. But wildlife has always been a passion. And then as I grew older, I started to take an interest in volunteering projects and did my first one back in 1993. And I learned a couple of things that quite shocked me. One was that we didn't know as much about animals as I thought we did. I kind of assumed we knew pretty much all there was to know about these animals. In fact, it's almost the opposite is true. We're constantly learning. I say we, but as a civilization, I suppose, however you want to bracket it. But we're constantly learning about these animals. We are, I think, learning all the time that we underestimate a lot of them, particularly their intelligence. And that, to me, is one of the things that makes it much more interesting to photograph animals, because part of it is about photographing behaviors. And certainly that was the case this year in 2024 in Namibia. I was able to photograph behaviors that I hadn't seen before, or certainly hadn't photographed before. So that was one of the things that was a big eye-opener for me back in 93 when I joined some researchers, Kurt and Michelle Jenner, on a humpback whale research project they were running. And they were, I think, in their second year of it. They've now, so sort of more than 30 years later, they are very well respected and renowned in their field. They have made a massive contribution to our understanding of whales in general, not just humpbacks, but at the time their focus was humpbacks. And it's really nice to have been involved early on with their work. And I'm still in contact with them from time to time. So that was one eye-opener. And the second thing that really struck me was how many of these animals, not just humpbacks, and perhaps the story of whales is more known, but how many of these animals are actually endangered and how few the numbers are. So, for example, I went to India back in 2018, and then while I was living in Sydney, I was involved with a couple of other photographers, and together we made up We're Observers. So We're Observers was started by Shane Rosario, who's a professional photographer in Sydney. And working with him is Colin Winter Seaton, who was recently on a podcast with me. So Colin would describe himself as an amateur photographer, but he teaches Adobe, Lightroom, Photoshop, all of that stuff. And he is very, very good with smartphones. So he is absolutely, for me, the go-to person on anything to do with smartphones and anything to do with Adobe software. So between us, I was involved with photo walks that they would run. So initially it was every week. And then when I was involved, it dropped to every fortnight. But we would meet people in Circular Quay in Sydney. And it was a free event organised through Meetup. And we would give people a challenge and we would take them around that area. And the challenge might be to photograph particular shapes or particular composition elements like leading lines, for example. And the reason for that, though, was to help people expand their photography. And we were there basically to teach them, to help them to really see what was around and then convey what they were seeing through their photography. And this, to me, is a big thing in photography, to show people their world, perhaps in a way they've never seen it before. So the reason I'm talking about all that is that we did aim to run a trip to India as part of We're Observers, a photography trip. Now, that never came off. But when I was doing research for that, the number that came up was that for tigers worldwide, there are less than, it's around 5,000. Now, 5,000, what does that mean? Well, it means that you could put all of them into a kind of medium-sized sports stadium, soccer stadium, whatever, and you'd still have plenty of room left. So the point of all this is that this to me was a real eye-opener, and it is quite concerning to me that these iconic animals are in danger of disappearing completely. So a couple of generations from now, people who are children right now, they may never have the opportunity to see these animals in the wild. And this is down primarily to the actions of human beings, our actions. So one of the aims of my photography is to try and share that message, but also every time I sell a photograph, so if you've been thinking about buying one from me, please do. But I always put a minimum of 10% of what you've paid as a contribution to a couple of projects that I support. And there are two at the moment. I would like to expand that, but two's all I can really handle right now with the volume of sales that I have. So one of them is based in Queensland. It's called Half Cut, and the guys there buy up chunks of Daintree rainforest, which is ancient. And we really don't know that much about what's in the rainforest. I mean, that's the reality of it. So who knows what's lurking in there that could be of huge benefit to people. And yet ancient rainforest gets chopped down with gay abandon by people who want to drill resources, get oil and all this kind of stuff, which we really don't need, frankly, because that's caused massive damage to the environment that we need to survive. So I'm not a big one for saving the planet because, frankly, I don't think the planet needs saving, because we know that there have been mass extinctions in the past, and all that happens is the Earth just kind of resets itself and carries on. But the problem is when it does this reset, most of the species alive at the time, and in this instance it includes us, will disappear because they can no longer survive in the new environment. So at the danger of getting a little bit preachy, because clearly this is something I am passionate about, that's kind of what I want my work to contribute to. So Half Cut is one of the projects, and in the website there's more information on these if you would like, and links to their own websites if you would like to find out more and help them directly with what they're doing. You don't have to buy through me, please just help. But the second project is EHRA, Elephant Human Relations Aid, that's the EHRA. And I worked with them initially in 2019, and they do amazing work. And I got to know Rachel Harris, who's the managing director of EHRA in Namibia. And I absolutely love what they're doing. So I'm not going to go into the whole history of that because that's another podcast and I've already covered that. But they are essentially trying to make themselves redundant through education and just using volunteers to create protection around infrastructure that is desperately needed by villagers and the people who live in what is a very harsh environment over there. So if you've never been, I absolutely recommend it, and do please consider volunteering with EHRA. And you can listen to the podcast with Rachel as well. That was that went out a couple of months ago. So I think actually it may have gone out in November because I was somewhere around there. Anyway, you can find it. Okay, so that was a big driver, though, for this year because EHRA had been in operation for 20 years and they decided to do this 100K walk in the desert over 5 days. So it was a volunteering thing and you pay to go and all of that. So as I said, I wanted to be an explorer. I love the idea of wandering around the desert. And so I signed up. And unfortunately, the way I am, I'm not very good at reading the small print. I'm very good at reading headlines and getting very excited and then diving in without really looking any further. So it kind of happened, and the walk turned out to be a lot tougher than I'd anticipated. I did a little bit of research and got all the temperatures completely wrong for what they would be that time of year in Namibia. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but it was actually an awful lot hotter. So going back to behind the scenes, that meant that for a good chunk of this year, once I'd committed to doing this walk, I started doing more walks locally. So I'm in the country. I was actually doing walks on the roads though, but I do 20 Ks, thereabouts, about 3.5 hours. And in the end, I was fully loaded up as well with a camel bag, backpack and extra stuff in there, just so that I was used to carrying the weight and making sure all my kit worked. So it's not just about the cameras, but I actually bought new walking boots because my old ones served me very well. But they were starting to look a bit tired. On one of them, the kind of sole part was, I think, it's starting to show early signs of coming away. So I decided to invest in new boots, and they've walked at least 300 Ks now. But this is all part of it. So I did my prep, did all my walks, got ready to go, and I also took advantage of the situation being in the southern hemisphere. This is really tenuous. But I really wanted to go back to Australia as well and revisit Sydney, at least, because it's 5 years since I lived there, since I left, and I really wanted to visit people. So I decided that as I was heading in that general direction, I would carry on once the walk was over and spend a few days in Sydney, which is what I did. So anyway, with the walk, so that, as I say, it was a 5-day walk in the desert. We walked, actually it was about 105, 106 Ks in the end, so it was slightly longer. And I met some great people as well doing that walk. It was a really good bunch of people, had a fabulous time. And then while I was in Namibia, I hadn't been to Etosha. I hadn't gone to Etosha when I was there before, and I really wanted to go because I'd heard great things about it. And in fact, it absolutely delivered. And I was only there for 2 nights because it was kind of tacked onto this walk. I hadn't really organised anything because I was very busy with lots of things. And then I was heading off to Australia. So I decided, I got in touch with the people at EHRA, and they just put me on to a local company actually based in Windhoek, who did safaris. So it was a touristy thing, which isn't what I normally go for. To be honest, the vehicle we were in was awful. It was a kind of truck thing, and I really disliked them. I like the really small open vehicles, ideally no sides, because then it's as unimpeded as you can get without actually getting out and walking. So I much prefer being in that kind of vehicle, but that wasn't the case. And then I did modify my plans a little bit once I'd organised it. And these guys at Chameleon, I have to say, were really accommodating, helped me out. So I gave them a very good review on TripAdvisor. So, and this, I guess, is another part of it, and reason for sharing this. It's, sometimes you just take advantage of where you are and try and make the most of it. And that's what I was doing. So that was kind of behind the scenes. So as far as the walk went, that was a challenge, much harder than I thought. As I'd said, it was much, much hotter than I thought. And in fact, when I got there, when we did get to the starting point, which was a few hours from Swakopmund, where we started on the coast, we drove up to Mount Bamberg, which is, we walked around part of the base of that mountain, and then headed off into the desert. And I must admit, myself and an Aussie guy who I met, who was great. And we both kind of looked at one another when the word challenge came up, because I think we'd both done the same thing. We hadn't really bothered to read any further. I just got, EHRA, I want to support them. Oh, they're doing a walk, let's go. So even despite the prep I'd done, the walk was much harder than I'd prepared for, because it wasn't on smooth road. It was all stones and rocks and things like that, particularly the early part where we were up and down little ridges and things. And the second afternoon, so this is the behind the scenes thing that doesn't get shared, is I've been walking, been fine the first day and a half, but and the way we worked it, we'd camp overnight, we'd leave early in the morning, have a bit of breakfast, leave early. The four-wheel drive guys, so we had a support crew, they would clean everything up and head off to where we were having lunch, where we'd meet them a few hours later. Then we'd be there for a couple of hours, 2.5, something like that. Have some lunch, relax, because it really was the hottest part of the day at that point. And then we would head off again, and they would do the same thing, clean up, and then go ahead of us and set up the camp for where we'd spend the evening and that night. And then we'd repeat, sort of rinse and repeat for a few more days. But the afternoon on the second day, we'd started the walk. I was all loaded up. I had my 3 litres of water on me, so I had 2 litres in my camelback, another litre and another water bottle that I have. And I started feeling a bit kind of off early in the walk, but then probably less than an hour into the afternoon walk, I just felt like my energy had gone. And I then struggled, and we were stopping regularly anyway, but certainly on that walk, I was the worst of the people who were actually on the walk, because some people had opted not to do that leg. They weren't feeling great, but I'd been feeling fine when we started. And it really did come down to just being stubborn and determined and pushing on, which is what I tend to do, which kind of works for me sometimes, but other times it really doesn't. I guess on that occasion it did, because I was absolutely determined I was going to see this through and complete it. So that is what happened, but it was a real struggle. And somewhere along the way as well, I managed to get a stomach infection, or an infection in my guts anyway. So it didn't really kick in until we'd finished the walk. And what happened when we'd finished the walk, so that was 5 days, we did a final, the final night was spent at EHRA's camp, which is on one of the rivers, actually. I mean, it's dry most of the time, but it was the same camp I'd stayed in 5 years earlier when I was volunteering with them, although some of it had been rebuilt because it had been there'd been a big flood go through and it had damaged a lot of the old camp, so it had to be rebuilt, which is the nature of these places. And again, met another group of people who were volunteering. They were going to do a volunteer project the following week. And then we headed off back to Swakopmund, where we had a night, and then I got an early shuttle bus up to Windhoek, and in fact met somebody who'd been on the walk. And we when we weren't dozing in the bus, we were sort of chatting about the walk. So that was all good. So, but it did involve a bit of bouncing backwards and forwards. And in fact, my original plan was to fly in and out of Walvis Bay, which is near Swakopmund, but and there's a daily flight run by Airlink, so one of the smaller airlines that you'll find. I think they're part of South African Airways, but they're kind of one of the smaller ones you'll find. But the problem I had was with the flights I had coming in from Europe and then heading off to Australia, the turnaround in Johannesburg was quite tight. It was around 2 hours from arriving on the incoming inbound flight and then leaving on the outbound. And if you've ever been to Johannesburg Airport, now I've been in and out of there quite a bit, and my experience generally is that it's really slow. And I decided that 2 hours was too tight, and ended up just cancelling my flights to and from Walvis Bay and flying in and out of Windhoek, because there are more flights. Windhoek's the capital of Namibia, if you don't know, and there are more flights every day. So again, excuse me, heads up. If you are doing this kind of trip, do make sure you've got a comfortable turnaround at the airport. And if you haven't, I always recommend erring on the side of caution. And the main reason for me doing that is that when I've got all my gear packed up, so I don't do excess luggage generally, because I've got to carry it all around. But things like Airlink, their stowed baggage was a maximum of 20 kilos, whereas every other flight I had was 22 or 23 actually. So you need to obviously plan for that. And also I needed that bag to be with me when I headed off into the desert. So it's really important that I was able to make my connections. So that didn't screw up happily, and that all worked. But again, behind the scenes, just make sure you've got all of that lined up. So anyway, we got up to Windhoek. That's where I was going to be flying out of a few days later after I'd been up to Etosha. But by then, this stomach infection, or my guts, whatever, it was getting worse. So I ended up using a fair bit of Imodium. But that meant that while I was able to shoot during the day, I was up most of the nights, certainly that I was in Etosha. I didn't get a lot of sleep. Prior to that, I hadn't had too much sleep on the walk either. I just wasn't sleeping well before I'd even left. I hadn't been sleeping well for all sorts of reasons. So basically, through that trip, I was pretty tired. I was getting up, not having had a good rest, and just having to sort of step up and force myself to do what I had to do to be with these groups and then go. So the photographs that you see that were taken in Etosha, I hadn't had a lot of sleep. I was using the Imodium pretty heavily because I had very active nights to and from the bathroom. And also, I'd hurt my back. So I've got an older back injury that I had aggravated before I went to Uganda a couple of years ago. And in fact, I was trying to get back into running to get fit, and I absolutely damaged my back. And I was still in a fair bit of pain when I went to Uganda and ended up doing like 3 hour hikes in the rainforest with a backpack laden with photography gear. And would have paid really good money when I found the gorillas to just have 10 minutes sitting in an armchair to sort myself out. But that, again, is the nature of it. So the back did kick in again while I was in Etosha. So it was actually quite painful, I found, just getting myself positioned so that I could take the photographs. And the original shots, again, definitely behind the scenes stuff. A lot of them weren't particularly well lined up. They weren't level, all that sort of stuff. So these are things I just, deal with in post. But the important thing is to get the shot, and then you deal with the rest later. So that was sort of what was going on. So that really was... Etosha was absolutely brilliant. The colours are fantastic. Because of all the salt, it's actually on a salt plain. So, and because some of the trees, the leaves have gone orange like they would in autumn. And these were shot in September. So it's actually spring in the southern hemisphere. But the colours were just amazing. And it almost looked like a lot of the animals were on snow. So I've got these, I love them, particularly some of the elephant photographs, because you've got them on this kind of white, or almost white ground, the colour of the ground. You've got these stunning kind of orange, bronzy leaves, and it's completely different. I'm just trying. I have shot photographs of elephants in the desert before when I was in Namibia before, but it's pretty much sand and brown rocks because it's iron ore there, so you get that kind of colouring. But it's to a degree, it's what you'd expect. Whereas up in Etosha, it was quite different. It was not, no green, or not so much in the way of greens around, which is other where I've taken photographs of elephants in other countries. There's always a lot of greenery around. So I love that. I was very pleased with those photographs, and got to take photographs of giraffe drinking, which is actually fairly rare. I have seen it before, but I wasn't able to get much in the way of photographs of it. And zebras as well, doing very odd kind of nuzzling behaviours going on. So I managed to photograph some of that. So I got really excited by that. That was great. But the sort of whole backdrop to doing these shots was... very much on the Imodium. So do take. So I guess the lesson from this is do take stuff like that with you, because even if you're a good traveler, if you don't get sick very often, and I don't get sick very often. I'm very lucky in that respect. I get a bit of. I've got an allergy to something which I think might be either dust or pollen, possibly manual labour. Not sure. But I do take antihistamines with me. But, just make sure you've got the right medication with you should something go wrong. Because, again, if you are going to places that are a bit more remote, I can guarantee you that where we were in the desert in Namibia, there were no pharmacies. So, go prepared. Just think ahead, think of worst case scenarios, and make sure you're covered. Hopefully they won't happen, but if you do have something like that happen, do make sure you got something. So that was it. Now, I guess the final thing I was going to say on this, from a behind the scenes perspective, is when I did get back to Johannesburg. I was really worried about the flight, but luckily I was starting to recover. I wasn't fully recovered on the flight, but again, by working my way through my Imodium supply, I was good on the flight was fine. I didn't actually sleep on any of the flights I had from leaving France. I flew out of Bordeaux initially to, I think, pretty much getting back, but definitely on the flight to Australia I didn't. And I get aisle seats these days because I try and drink, because I do get problems with, I have had kidney stones a few times now, so and they're quite nasty, and I like to drink a lot of fluids, but of course on a flight it means you're up and down a bit, so I get an aisle seat each time. And we were kind of squashed in on these. It was a Qantas flight to Sydney from Johannesburg, and none of us were particularly big, but we were but everyone's a little bit on the wide side. So we were, there was physical contact basically between everyone. Everyone was fine. There was nothing nasty, but it did mean that at any time anyone moved, you're awake again. So I didn't get much sleep. And the fun part on that flight was we were a couple hours out of Sydney. So they were doing the breakfast service, and the trolley had just passed me. We'd all set up with breakfast. We're on the little trays on the back of the seat in front, all lined up, ready to go. And the guy next to me nudged me because I had headphones on, and I sort of took them off to hear him. And he said, "I think I'm going to throw up." So nothing focuses you when you're asleep than somebody in the seat next to you telling you they think they're about to throw up. So that was my breakfast tray ended up on the aisle as I'm desperately trying to get all this stuff out of his way so I can jump out and he can jump out. So that was an exciting end to that flight. And I have to say, when I got to Sydney, so if you've been to Sydney on an international flight and you've got the digital passports that we have these days, they have these little machines all the way through. So passport control, you can... I think you fast track. I can't remember now. That's how tired I was. But anyway, you got the little machines, and they're sort of all the way down to passport control. So you don't have to grab the very first ones. You can walk down, and there are more machines down there. But I jumped on the machine because there was one free, and stuck my passport in. And I can't remember now what it asked me, but a couple of questions came up. Have I been to the wilderness? To which I answered yes. And then have I been to, I think it asked me if I'd been to Africa, and I said yes. And it asked, have I been to any of the countries on the list? And I looked at this list of countries, and honestly, I could not remember which country I'd just come from. I was pretty sure it began with an N, but this was just how tired I was. And luckily, remember it was, Namibia came back, but I'm really pleased it wasn't a person, because I think I would have looked very suspicious if I couldn't have remembered where I just come from. It was purely down to really not having a good night's sleep for at least 3 weeks at that point, and it was possibly longer. So I thought I would just share this as a story. It's just sort of silly stuff, but obviously somebody's relevant as well when you're thinking of your trips. And I just thought it gave you... It's just sharing a little bit of background about the realities of my life when I go and do these things. They definitely don't always go smoothly. And I guess one final thing I'll just add, it's just another little story that I'm pretty sure I have shared before, but I might not have done, who knows. But this is actually going back to 2022 when I went to Uganda. So one of the things I always recommend is that you make sure you have a local guide. And when I went to Namibia, I could have organised somebody, but I had lots and lots of other things going on. I just didn't get around to it. And I just did, went the easiest route, the path of least resistance, which was just to jump on a regular tourist thing and hope for the best. And it kind of worked out. It wasn't too bad. But ideally, if I thought about it, I would have either just hired something myself. But because I'm on my own, I would really have hired a guide as well, just so there's two people. I think when you're in that sort of environment, it's probably a little bit foolhardy to go on your own unless you really know the area, unless you're really confident you know what you're doing. So when I went to Uganda, you have to go with organised tours anyway, because the interactions with the gorillas are very strictly controlled. So I think it's a dozen people a day. That's it, who can go and visit the gorillas. So it really means you've got to plan in advance, go with somebody who knows what they're doing, and they have to organise it all for you, all this kind of stuff. If you're going to one of those locations. So if you are going to visit and go and see, or hopefully go and see mountain gorillas in Uganda, you do have to go down that path. Someone will have to organise it with you so that you get on one of these official groups. But the thing I want to share there is we did these big long hikes that I've already mentioned, and when we got to where the gorillas were, so they're moving around every day, and if you're lucky, they're going to be close to where you start the walk from the sort of visitor centre thing. Unfortunately, when I went, we were unlucky. They were about as far away as they get. They were 3 hours away through, the mountain gorillas. So they're in mountains, it's forest, it's wet because it's rainy season. That's when they come down and eat the bamboo shoots. So that's the best time to see them. But it does mean it's slippery. It's very muddy in places. definitely take a walking pole. I didn't, and they gave us a bamboo pole, but a walking pole, I mean, we absolutely needed them, and a walking pole really would have been better. And in fact, one lady in our group did slip on just a path. It wasn't even a dangerous part, and she fractured her wrist. Didn't realise until she got home, but it was very painful and she had to bind it up. So, the lesson there is, have all the right kit with you, but even so, be very careful when you're there. But going back to the guides and the reason for sharing this, I was there. Before we met the gorillas, we met with the group of trackers who were with them. So there was a little bunch of, I think maybe 3 or 4 of them who'd actually been with the gorillas. They go out first thing in the morning, way ahead of the tourist group, go to where the gorillas were the previous day and then track them and find them. And then they've got radios. So they can talk to the guide leading the tourist group, if you like, the visitors, and tell them exactly where they are and keep them updated if the gorillas move. And they actually do the same thing with chimpanzees as well. So we had this huge hike. I'd got a bad back. I was not the happiest of bunnies, but on the other hand, I was about to see these, go face to face with these amazing animals. And they really are. If you get the chance to see gorillas, they're fantastic. They're absolutely amazing, lovely animals. So went and did all of that, and we got briefed about what to do if a gorilla ran at you. So this does happen with more the young males. And it seems to be setting a status thing as far as I can work out. If you know better, please correct me, give me a comment or an email or whatever. And we were told that if one does run at you, just stand absolutely still and just stare at the ground, stare at your feet, and definitely do not make eye contact with them. And of course, I'm wandering around, being very careful, very respectful of the animals, trying to get different shots. And I was standing there and this young male ran at me. And he came right up close to me and I'm just standing there as I was told, and I was studying the grass. I've never studied grass as much as I studied it on that occasion. And then he decided, it was all good and he wandered off. But he was a big chap compared to me because I'm not a big chap. And that was an interesting experience. But again, this is why I recommend going with a guide. So I have... I've been for walks in the Okavango. We camped overnight there and went for a walk, and the guide briefed us about what to do if there was a lion and things like that. I've been tracking in Zimbabwe with, in fact, where my plan is to go this year, but hopefully that will eventuate and I'll be able to share more work with you and share more stories. But Dean, who I will be meeting if I go to Zimbabwe, was the Dean on the occasions where I was with him tracking elephant and rhino on the ground. And again, he knew exactly what to do and we got good briefings. So that is really important. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. And if you are listening to this live, I hope you've had a great Christmas. I hope you have a great year in 2025. If you're listening to this much later, I have a great year whenever you're listening to this. So thank you to everyone for your support. And if you've enjoyed the podcast, please buy me a cup of coffee. You can donate or subscribe or join my Patreon. But it does all go to help me to carry on doing what I'm doing if you are enjoying it. So thanks again. I'll speak to you in the next podcast. Bye for now. Oh, and just one more thing before you go. Just remember to drop any comments that you have or questions, and I'll get back to them in a future podcast. And remember that there's a new podcast every Friday. So if you've enjoyed this one, please remember to like and subscribe and join me on my mailing list and you'll get a heads up about the latest podcast. So bye for now.